way too early predictions. We're here. I've got my main guy, Suneil. We're going to be giving our way too early 49ers predictions for 2023 with the schedule out, with some news out, talking about it all right after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on three. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the program. I've got my guy Sunil here with me, talking some 49ers on this early Friday morning. How you doing, my man?
Doing fantastic, man. I haven't talked to you in quite some bit. Getting it in early 49er talk on a Friday morning. I love it, man. Start the day off well, right?
Yeah, man. I mean, before this week, just been a little bit of a YouTube break. Was sick last week, so that covers it. And then the move out process, coming back home, but now we're all settled, and now we are ready to get it started. So
Awesome.
appreciate those of you guys that are tuning in. Make sure you guys hit that like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on both my channel and Sunil's channel. Both of us are streaming today, so we've got a fun episode. And let's start it off with some of the 49ers news that we've seen recently before we get into our predictions. And that is regarding quarterback Trey Lance. Quarterbacks coach Jeff Christensen, obviously the one where we saw the viral video of Lance making a throw, Patrick Mahomes in the background. That was all under the tutelage of quarterbacks coach Jeff Christensen, who I believe is out of Texas, also works extensively with Patrick Mahomes. Said some comments about Trey Lance. How you feeling about him?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the comments were very positive from what I've read so far. I haven't actually read the full article, but the parts that are coming out, seeing large strides day after day, seeing that he's picking up and looking better significantly, I think are all great signs. And that coming off the heels of a few weeks ago, Ian Rappaport talking about how the 49ers team actually gave him some pushback as far as, why are you only talking about Sam Darnold? Trey Lance is still, one of a guy that we like and could possibly be a starter type of thing. So it's nice to start seeing, positive stuff come out about Trey because, it has all been, I wouldn't say negative, but silence, right? And sometimes if you're not hearing anything positive, people are just going to run with that narrative and say that, it's negative. So look, if you're going to trust anybody, you're going to trust the quarterback's coach of, Patrick Mahomes, who possibly, probably is the best quarterback in the league, possibly could go down as the best quarterback ever, right? He's on that trajectory with what he's accomplished in his young career. It's great. I think that the fact that Trey is even deciding to switch quarterbacks coaches and start working with somebody like Christensen, being around somebody like Patrick Mahomes, you're obviously gonna get, you're working out with somebody with people so elite, you're gonna be forced to get better. The fact that he's seeking that out, I think, is a good sign because, for me, Rohan, and we haven't really discussed it too much. I mean, this is a very, very important year for Trey Lance. I'm a big Trey Lance fan. I think you are as well, but I'm not naive about the situation that Trey Lance is in. I think a lot of people put blame on Shanahan, on the 49ers organization, and, that tend to be Trey Lance fans. And, obviously there are parts of blame of everybody, but you have to control what you can control. And anybody who's realistic about Trey Lance knows that he hasn't really, he hasn't really taken advantage of his opportunities. Now, I'm not saying there was a ton of opportunities, but he hasn't done anything really to separate himself in a way that he needed to in a very peculiar situation of the 49ers, being a team that's ready to win now, but took on a quarterback that might not have been ready to play like from day one type of situation. So year three of Trey Lance, he isn't the favorite, right? If Purdy was healthy, we all know Purdy would be the starter over Trey Lance. So Trey Lance has an opportunity only because Purdy isn't available. But with that opportunity, Trey Lance has to wow people. And what I mean by that, Rohan, and I'll send it to you after this. I don't think that if it's close between Trey Lance and Purdy, like if it's very similar, even if Trey Lance is just slightly better, but it's very similar as far as their play during OTAs and the off season, I still think they go with Purdy. And the reason for that is because they feel like they have a known commodity with Purdy, not only the player, but how the team responds to that player. We all know Purdy hasn't lost in any game that he started and finished healthy. He hasn't lost. He's been able to stay healthy
Right.
for a long period of time, and he's been able to elevate the play of the team around him when he's on the field. So it's hard to refute that. And then on top of that, you're my cap specialist, but financially, Brock Purdy is a much better financial route for them as well because he's a seventh round draft pick instead of a first round draft pick. So as far as financially, there's probably some money saved there, and maybe he can't necessarily ask for as big of a contract. Who knows? I don't know about that, but on top of that, trade viability. Trey Lance probably has a little bit more value being such a high draft pick that could still be moved. So all of those things, are kind of negatives for Trey Lance as far as his ability to stay with the 49ers, unless he comes out and really has taken such a significant leap that you can't look at him and look at Purdy and be like, they're on the same level. And that's a lot to ask for from a third-year quarterback. But I'm looking at it like that's his situation at this point. What do you think about that?
I don't think I can dispute it too much, right? You're talking about how the expectations are high. And like you said, I've been a guy that believes in Trey Lance because I thought he was a good prospect coming out. And I still believe the potential is there and that the opportunity necessarily hasn't been as much. But with what Purdy did last year, and I've been one of the people. I just call it how I see it. I've been one of the people that hasn't said Purdy is uh, what he showed last year wasn't elite. It's just it was better than what we've seen from Jimmy Garoppolo, and added an extra layer to the offense. But still, with that being the strongest play of strongest quarterback play that we had seen under Shanahan in the 49ers era, it's tough to unseat him, which is why there's going to need to be the offseason. But if you do end up being the week one starter, good play for those first 4 weeks or so until Purdy comes back. You need to essentially prove that you're the guy that they can't take it out of your hands. That's how Trey Lance needs to go about this offseason. Now, about the comment specifically, I think I mean there were a lot of little parts that were eye opening for me, but I mean it's a good sign. And back in forgetting with Mahomes, but back in March when we saw the video with Christensen, somebody had asked me, is it a positive, right? Switch representation, work with Christensen and Mahomes. And I said, anytime you work out with such a dominant quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, you're bound to be better. It's just bound to be I mean, it can't be a bad thing. And it's clear because Christensen said in the article with the Athletic how essentially Lance got better by just watching what Mahomes did. And I think that that's an important part to it, and that's where you see the substantial jump. And so for Lance, I think that there's definitely areas where he's getting better according to his quarterback coach. But the other part that I want to bring up to you and see what you have to think about it is the arm soreness part. And Christensen said how with the previous motion, you'd have 3 days of intense work and then need a day off, which doesn't happen with quarterbacks with a good technique. However, um, that's something that they've worked on, and that's something that shouldn't be a long running issue now with. with Lance and the fixed arm motion that they've kind of looked to improve with during the few months that they spent together.
Yeah, so I actually look at that as a red flag, and the reason for that is, it would be great if in just 2 months you can get the muscle memory and be able to fix something that's so ingrained in someone's head as the way you throw a ball, right? Trey Lance has been a quarterback for a long time, right? He's been throwing the ball a certain way for a long time. It's just his natural tendencies and what is normal for him, kind of thing. And I think that obviously you work on things like that, but I don't know. And look, I'm not claiming to be an expert on people's throwing motions and how much throwing motions can change. But as far as just habits, I think we all can say we're pretty experts on habits. And it's easy, it's really hard to change a habit, especially when pressure is on and things are going crazy like in a game. Are you going to stick to something that is very new to you that you've been working on for a matter of months? Or are you going to revert back to your habit that you've been doing for years that's just ingrained in your head? I don't know how much a quarterback can really change their motion in a way that's going to be like significantly different from what they're doing. Because from what I'm um, gleaning from what you just said and what that article said, it has to be. I don't think it's tweaks. It's probably something significant if it's leading to a difference between him being able to throw 5 days a week or him being able to throw a couple days a week because his his arm angles and his throwing motion puts so much stress on his shoulder that he needs a break. Like, can you really change that within a few months to a point that it's going to be a significant long term change, or is it just something temporary when you have somebody like when that's all you're focused on for a couple weeks of training with a coach?
And I think that I, are you saying it's a red flag or
Well,
what?
the red flag to me though is if his natural throwing motion, Rohan, is that detrimental to where arm fatigue is a real thing, right? We haven't seen him play a full season. But if his natural throwing motion is going to lead to arm fatigue later on in the season, which, look, this is a lot of ifs, a lot of me putting things in there. Like, I'm not claiming that this is true, but the fact that he's saying that, hey, he has to change his arm, his the way he throws the ball because it's going to lead to arm fatigue. It naturally needs him to take a break after a few days of throwing the ball. Yeah, I think that's a big deal. Like, you don't hear that very often from quarterbacks. The fact that he's been a quarterback his whole life and that hasn't been that he's dealt with that, to me, is a little bit of a shock. And it also couples to maybe why at NDSU he didn't throw the ball that often. Like, he averaged 16 throws per game, which is obviously extremely low. Obviously, he ran the ball a lot there as a quarterback, but is he going to be able to take on the larger workload as a professional quarterback? Like, that is something to be aware of. He hasn't proven to stay healthy, right? In the 2 seasons that he has been in the league, and that's without full playing time type of thing. So is that another thing that, hey, later on down the line he's not gonna be able to be as healthy? I don't know. Like, to me, that is something to be at least aware of going into whether or not this is the guy or not.
I don't like. To me, it's interesting. For me, the biggest red flag is it took this long to understand that there was a significant need to change something in that throwing motion, right? It's year three, and while injuries have hampered Lance, especially that first year, the second off season, you had a good amount of time to understand like something was wrong. And Lance, I remember last time throwing motion, and then obviously we hear about arm fatigue, which pretty clearly was a thing with Trey Lance, even going up until this offseason. And then with Christensen, another blurb that I saw in this article was that it took 4 days to figure out what was wrong with his throwing motion when it usually takes 1 day. And so all of this combined, certainly interesting. It's a great sign though, in my opinion, now that he's like, I understand what you're saying, how it's tough to change something that you've been ingrained in for such a long period of time, but it seems like Lance was willing now to figure out the changes and that it's for the better, understanding that this arm soreness might be behind him and things like that. And so to me, I think it's a good thing now that it's understood and that things to the point where I think it's going to let him have a productive offseason.
Now, Rohan, you're more of a historian and than I. Can you recollect a time of a quarterback that has significantly changed their throwing motion that led to that, like, hey, they threw this way and then all of a sudden they completely changed and it completely changed the way their game and everything? Can you point to a moment of a quarterback being able to do that?
I think that I honestly think it happens more often than not. Um, for me, like in the article itself as well, it says how it says how quarterbacks are constantly tweaking and fixing up the throwing motion and the mechanical part. And I do think that that's normal. I think a lot of quarterbacks have tried to change that, and I mean, I think people try and make it make their throwing motion quicker. Um, as for significant, I think Justin Fields, maybe you can make an argument that there's been a mechanical change. I don't know if you can say significant, but obviously his ankle was when he came out, his throwing motion was talked about a good amount. I think that there's been a change there. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
off the top of my
I
head,
guess
maybe
I think
I think there
Cam
was a
Newton.
story
I think
about
there
Baker
was a
Mayfield.
discuss
Yeah,
like
Cam
Cam
Newton.
Newton might be one. You may maybe Josh Allen because obviously his numbers significantly changed over his 3 years,
I know
first three
Baker
years in the league.
Mayfield had a quarterback change, like
But
with his
I
throwing motion
guess
too. Yeah,
I guess I guess maybe maybe I'm overthinking it, but maybe if it's just tweaks, I guess that makes sense. I don't know. I guess I understood it like this
and
is like a whole hard significant change. Which, if
I
that's
don't
the
know
case, I don't know.
when we saw the throw when it was it didn't seem like there was too much of a change. I don't think like when you look at the motion itself, maybe they're trying to make it more tight, more crisp, but I think that I think that it's overharped on how much the change was. I don't think it's as significant as of a change. Now, obviously, we'll see in training camp how big the change was because Marco just tweeted out that he's going back to Christensen after OTAs
Right.
at the end of mandatory minicamp in June. But I don't think that it's as significant of a change as maybe you might think. I
Right.
think that there's specifically a change that they've made clearly. I don't think though when you look at the actual product is as significant as what the change might actually be behind the scenes.
And before we get off this topic, I want to ask you a question. How how because I believe that if it's close, they go with Purdy. Just because of the way the team responded to Purdy. I think there's a confidence level in Purdy that they've seen the team win and, you know, play very well with Purdy at the quarterback. Even though I agree with you necessarily that Purdy isn't necessarily an elite quarterback, but I think in this system, he plays really, really well in this system. His attributes work really, really well in this system. Do you believe that there needs to be a significant gap between Trey Lance and Purdy, or what does Shanahan, Lynch, and the whole 49ers brass need to see to keep going with Trey Lance? Is it team success, or is it specific to what he's bringing to that quarterback position
I think
or
it's a
coming
mix of
from?
yeah, I think it's a mix of both. I think it's a mix of both. As for Trey Lance, I think. Again, I'm going with the assumption that Purdy maybe misses the first 4 weeks based off Kyle Shanahan's timeline of the 6 to 8 months. I'm just going right in the middle with that, sevenish month period. But I think that team success is important. Obviously, you've got to be winning games because the one thing that Brock Purdy did was win games. The other thing he did was put the ball in the end zone, scoring. That's
Mhm.
the 49ers had their highest scoring period when Brock Purdy was at quarterback in the Shanahan era. But to me, it's Lance has to be a significant contributor to it. I like, the 49ers have won where they've developed the quarterback. He hasn't necessarily had the strongest game, but they've easily been able to win for a number of other factors with skill position players and things like that. I think Lance himself has to show the growth on the field while the 49ers are winning to essentially stop them from taking it out of his hands because he's the one who's experienced the growth, but he's also experienced, um, he's the one who's helping them get to those wins to the point where it's not necessary or it's not a smart move to make a change, just looking for something different.
How much do you think is going? Because one of the things that I think Purdy did a great job was getting the team around him to buy into him. Right? You just heard things like from Kittle, Juszczyk, even um, even guys on the defensive side of the ball. Whether I know Jimmy was saying a lot of great things about him when he was on the team last year. Fred Warner, he got the whole team to buy into him, right? I don't know if Trey Lance has been behind center long enough for the team to really buy into, because I think there's only so much you could do in the offseason. I think players really buy into it when it's you're out, quote unquote, like war, when you're actually playing games that matter, which Trey Lance hasn't played a lot of those. So how much do you think the team plays a role? Because we do know that Kyle Shanahan has mentioned that he sometimes makes decisions based off of what the team wants, right? What the players are telling him and stuff like that. Do you think that Trey Lance needs to win over the players to really take that job away from Purdy as well? Do you think that's going to play a role at all?
Now, this is the part that I personally believe is overblown. I think if Trey Lance proves that he can be a winning quarterback and make an impact on the team while they're winning, I don't think that this is an issue. If he's the quarterback that can best lead you to your goal, which is a Super Bowl, and if you understand that, he's showcased the talent to do that in the first 4 games and in the offseason, because he's going to get an entire offseason to prove his shot, I don't think there's going to be any issue in the quarterback like having to win over the locker room because winning games and contributing significantly to winning those games, I think, goes a long way in the locker room because what they want to see is really a proven option. The guy who can help them the most, not necessarily maybe the guy with the most potential, although he has a long way to reach it there. So if Lance
So,
can prove that he can help them, I don't think that's an issue.
so first 4 games, because you mentioned, the first 4 games, Lance probably has, um, leeway because Purdy is not going to be fully healthy. At the Steelers, at the Rams, and then 2 home games against the Giants and then the Cardinals. What do you need to see, or what do you think Shanahan needs to see in those 4 games from Trey Lance um, to for him to continue to be the starter when Purdy gets back?
I think that game one is going to be really tough just because you're going into Pittsburgh, a tough environment with really an unproven quarterback in either way, in Trey Lance or Sam Darnold. Darnold obviously unproven in that he's had 55 starts, hasn't had a great record, and also now coming into a new situation. Lance obviously the true unproven option. You're going into Heinz Field against a tough defense. I think that that's going to be a tough one for the quarterback, and so I think that that's going to be a nice teller of how prepared they are for the NFL season. But overall, I think you want to at least go games. And in 3-1, what do I want to see? I want to see a good execution of the offense. That's it. the statistics don't have to be over the chart. It's just, can they execute the offense well? Because that's what Purdy did when his play was at its highest level. And I'm not saying Purdy was perfect or anything. He was not nearly perfect. He still has a lot of flaws to clean up, but he executed the offense and they scored points as a result. I think that that's what you want to see: good offense, good execution, and the results being there with good points.
Yeah, and I think I'll push back a little bit because I think the stats are going to matter. I agree with you. I think obviously there has to be like they have to be 3-1, 4-0 is first. If they're 2-2 now, it's very, very questionable, depending on obviously health or what went on. But I do think the stats matter. Purdy was putting up close to 30 points a game. The offense was putting up close to 30 points a game. He protected the ball very well. Now, it's arguable if it was because of him or because of just luck, because there were a lot of throws that could have been intercepted that didn't get intercepted. But, for the most part, he wasn't turning the ball over, even though there was some questionable throws. And he was able to bail out the team with his mobility on multiple occasions. So I think that if these are just close wins, or the 49ers are averaging 17, 20, 21 points over these four games, Rohan, I still think even if they go 3-1, I still think I could see Trey being pulled out, because you look at Purdy and seeing, he's averaging 28, 30, 31 points per game. If the offense looks more explosive under him, I would say that he still has an opportunity to go win that start or get that starting position back. For me, I think that not only does the record have to be 3-1 or 4-0, I think that this team needs to see the offense being a reason why they're winning games. Because I think that's the biggest thing that changed when Purdy was there, was that he was the first quarterback where the defense felt like they didn't have to play perfect and they could still win a game. And because
Yeah.
they're putting up points. I think especially with those four opponents outside of Pittsburgh, the Rams defense has gotten worse. Giants aren't really known for their defense, even though they have some players there. And we know Arizona's, who knows
Eh,
what team's going
right.
to show up. So in those four games, you think that there's a great opportunity for the offense to really explode. I think if Trey Lance comes back and we see him put up, he needs to have, if we just see them winning 21-17, 24-20, like if these are the games that they're winning, even if they are 4-0 or 3-1, if he's not 2 or 3 of those games putting up over 30 points, I could see Purdy getting that starting job back. I do think statistics matter. I don't think it's just about executing the offense, because if you are executing that offense, you should be putting up 28, 30 points with the type of weapons that are around whomever that quarterback is.
I think that's fair if you talk about points. I was more so talking about the quarterback stats himself, and the reason being, like, Purdy had games where he passed for 17 to 26 for 217 yards, right?
Mhm.
65%, 217 yards. That's a good game. It's a solid game for Purdy. It's just obviously not like jumping off the charts in terms of
Right.
statistics. Even as one of his Bay, where he passed for 16 to 21 for 185 yards, right? Really solid accuracy, about 185 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, what I was saying is, you don't necessarily need individual stats to jump off the charts, but the offense has to be executing at a high level, and that obviously has to result in points.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I don't think he needs to put up like 300 yards passing, 80 yards rushing every single game. But I do think that if the games are close and it doesn't feel like this team could win just off of the offense, I would see a change, because I do feel like we felt that way, that the offense could win games under Purdy, which is what I think this team needs, is to not always have to rely on the defense being lights out for this team to win games. So that's what I think is going to be needed. And I think the way that Trey Lance could really separate himself from the other quarterbacks is early success in the games, first quarter points. That's one thing that even Purdy didn't necessarily do very well, is in those first few drives, get some points on the board, get a touchdown, go out to an early lead. We know this defense will be elite if they could always be playing with the lead, because at that point they get to be who they are, very aggressive, and take risks and all that kind of stuff. If Trey Lance can do that, especially because I think it lines up really well his opponents for him to look really, really good, right? It's not like he's playing lights out defenses. So he's going to get a chance to look really good because of the level of competition he's going to play. Is he going to take advantage of that? That's what's yet to be seen, because unfortunately to this point, he hasn't taken advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, it's the unfortunate reality. We'll definitely obviously see what comes to be of Trey Lance's future. I will say one thing though. Put it out in the article yesterday that I wrote about Trey Lance. If he doesn't win the job in camp, I think he should demand a trade. I I don't I don't see a future with him in San Francisco if he can't beat out Sam Darnold, and I think he should demand a trade.
If he can't beat out Sam Darnold, do you think there's a market for him?
I do. Yeah, I think that some team will trade. Like it depends on the way you ask it. Will there be a market for him for what San Francisco wants? No. But will there be a market for him? I think so. He's 23 years old with really no NFL experience. I think teams would be jumping at the potential that he has for cheap, understanding that if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But you've got a strong developmental option that you can likely get for cheap on a second deal. And, that can pay.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I think those opportunities, like those type of reclamation projects, success is few and far between. I mean, obviously, recently we've seen Gino kind of be along the same line. Actually, you can't really say it's on the same lines. I mean, the fact that he's back starting and kind of looking like he has a home with Seattle is one thing, but he got a lot more playing time than Trey got. So he started a lot of games for the Jets, even though he didn't necessarily play the way that I think a first round pick was expected at that time. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, it's a tough road for Trey if he doesn't win the starting job and if he can't beat out Darnold. But speaking of Darnold, I think our next topic was the Mike Mars saying that he believes the addition of Darnold makes the 49ers the best offense in the league, which I think was pretty crazy to think that Sam Darnold makes any team's offense that much better, because he hasn't really shown that in the two destinations that he's had. But what did you think about Mike Martz saying that? And do you think that there's a real chance that Sam Darnold is the week one starter for the 49ers?
Do I think there's a chance? Yes. Do I? How big that chance is? I'm not necessarily sure. I do think there's a chance. I think you can't ignore that's been there, right? Obviously, we've heard big time names say that the 49ers like Sam Darnold a lot, and I wouldn't be surprised if Kyle Shanahan views him as a guy who he can use as a reclamation project in a way, understanding that his system could benefits a lot of quarterbacks. And so to me, yeah, is there a chance? Yeah, there's a chance because it really depends on how does Trey Lance play, right? If he doesn't play well in the offseason, well, you're going with the other option, the guy who, despite 55 games of like obviously below average play, you've got a guy who I think the 49ers believe in a little bit. Talking about Mike Mark specifically, it's interesting because he essentially said how they're going to be the top offense, pointing to last year where they scored 26 and a half points a game without a star quarterback. And I do believe that it was interesting because when you talk about Darnold, he talks about how he was a talented quarterback coming out of college and that it was tough offensive situations. I wonder how much leeway you get understanding how many games Darnold has played because of talent in coming out of college. That is.
Yeah. I mean, once again, we kind of just mentioned reclamation project that's worked out, which is Geno Smith, right? Geno obviously had a lot of games for the Jets. He ended up not, they ended up benching him, and he ended up doing the whole backup quarterback role, and then ended up with Seattle and flourished under that offensive scheme. And now he's their full-time starter, and they didn't go after a young quarterback or anything like that. So he seems to be the quarterback, at least as of now, for the foreseeable future. So is it possible? Yes. Can Kyle Shanahan bring the best out of a quarterback? 1,000%, right? We've seen him do it on a multitude of occasions with, taking quarterbacks that were forgotten and make them relevant again, or take quarterbacks that were relevant and make them MVPs, right? So I do believe that there is that there, even if he isn't necessarily have the resume that matches the talent. But I have to, something you mentioned that I have to agree with is the chatter is too loud for it to be just no smoke there. I'm one that's very much, if it's in the media and it's not coming directly from the 49ers, that, it's probably just uh, national narrative and people that have bones to pick with the 49ers kind of put it out there. But a lot of it has come true. You know what I mean? Like the arm fatigue story, I thought was just a lie, but that came true. The Mac Jones, possibly at 3, ended up there was some truth to that, even though they did go with Trey Lance. So the fact that it's just so loud that the 49ers are high on Sam Darnold and makes me think that it's more than just a chance. Like I think there's I think that Sam Darnold truly believes that he could win this starting position and been given the sign that he can. And even more pressure on Trey to have to win it out. And I agree with you. If Sam Darnold beats out Trey, I do think that Trey doesn't end the year with the 49ers because obviously Purdy's coming back and you would think that they would just need Sam and Purdy and they don't need necessarily Trey Lance to be a third quarterback type of situation. But going back to the Mike Martz saying that the 49ers could be the number one offense, I think this is true regardless of who the quarterback is. And I'll say this reason. Am I saying for sure they'll be the number one offense? No, I don't know that because I do think there's some ridiculously good offenses out there, right? I think the Eagles can be the number one offense. I think the Bengals could be the number one offense. Obviously, Kansas City could be the number one offense. So I'm not saying it's for sure going to be them. However, a full year of Christian McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell healthy can definitely lead to this being the number one offense. One of the biggest questions last offseason, Rohan, I don't know if you remember, was the offensive line, right? People thought the offensive line, we didn't know there was, 3 guys that haven't started that many games on the interior of that offensive line. McGlinchey was coming off of an injury. So there was a lot of question marks. People thought, oh man, this offensive line could be the reason why this offense doesn't play well. Well, they played decent and maybe even above average. They were a top 10 offensive line. And 80% of that offensive line is coming back, right? With Colton McKivitz as the new right tackle. And he's somebody that has been developing under this 49ers staff for quite some time. So the offensive line is less of a question mark this year. The weapons, I think, are better, right? Brandon Ayuk is, I think, going to be a bona fide star this year if he wasn't last year. Debo's coming back with the chip on his shoulder. Kittle obviously had a really great last half of the season with Purdy there, so he's having nothing but confidence. And then you have arguably the best running back duo in the league now with Christian McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell,
Going
1-2
that
punch.
hard,
So
huh? In the league.
yeah,
All right.
yeah. Well, I mean,
No, it's a
what's a
valid
better?
take. It's a valid take.
Yeah. So I mean, to me, just with the weapons, they have all the potential in the world. And on top of that, I think the special teams is going to be better, and I think the defense is going to be just as opportunistic and really give the offense short field position, which also plays a role in the offense playing well or not. So it's pointing in the direction with how this team is set up that this offense could play well, regardless of if it's Purdy, Darnold, or Trey at quarterback.
No, I think that that's fair. And to me, yeah, I think this offense is going to flourish regardless of who's at quarterback as well, just because of the system and also because of the skill position players. Like to execute this offense, there are certain things that obviously the quarterback needs to be capable of, but it's quick decision making, just getting the ball out really and allowing your playmakers to do things, obviously excel at that type of game plan. Jimmy Garoppolo, that was his bread and butter. Even though we saw mixed results, the reason the offense worked is because it played to Jimmy Garoppolo's strengths once he entered the picture. I wonder, obviously, what type of offense is going to be implemented this summer because Lance and Darnold have different play styles and also can operate under different looks, right? Lance obviously could operate better under shotgun, understanding the power that the read option can present and the different options out of the backfield could present for in the running game, and we saw that when Lance was on the field last year. But Darnold could operate more under center, understanding that it sells the play action a little better, gets Shanahan into some of the action that we've seen him want to run. And so I do think that it's going to be an intriguing mix of how this offense is going to run and how quickly does that step onto the field. Because if you look at the back end of the slate for the 49ers, I think that that's tougher than the front end. And so that means you got to get to a quicker start if you want to be a top seed in the NFC. And so that's where my question comes in for the 49ers. How quick will get start, regardless of who's at quarterback, and can they put enough points to be the number one offense in the league?
Yeah, and that obviously has been hard for the 49ers to do outside of, the 2019 season where they went all the way to the Super Bowl. They usually struggle in the first half of the season, and the second half of the season is where they, kind of take off type of deal. So it is going to be important for them to start the year off strong, not only as a team, but whomever that starter is week one, for them to continue, if they want to continue to be the starter, really has to play well, because obviously we know Brock Purdy's coming in, and that's who the front office and Kyle Shanahan seem to think is the QB1 at this point.
No, I agree, and I mean that's the beauty of the competition that we're going to see in the offseason. Obviously, media gets to see it through open practices, um, through OTAs. We'll get to see it in training camp. It'll be a fun mix for sure. Moving on though to the last portion of today's topics, we've got the schedule, right? The schedule released last week. I think you've talked about it a little. I haven't really talked about it too much, but there's a lot of intriguing parts about the schedule. When it initially dropped, knowing the opponents, knowing both sides of who were playing at home, on the road, how'd you initially feel when we dropped or when the schedule dropped for the 49ers?
Yeah, overall, I thought that the schedule um, was favorable. And what I mean by favorable, I'm not saying it's an easy schedule, but I see it as a schedule that the 49ers could definitely excel in. There's a lot of games that I think are going to be exciting. Off the bat, being able to play Dallas and Cleveland, Cincinnati, uh, Baltimore, Pittsburgh. I think those games are going to just be very, very fun to watch from just a fan perspective. Obviously, I think a lot of those games can be difficult as well. Obviously, the toughest stretch to me is, that 3-game stretch where it goes Seattle, Eagles, Seattle, right? Where it's at Seattle, at Philadelphia, then home with Seattle. That's a 3-game stretch that I think could be potentially make or break as far as seeding for the playoffs, especially where that is in the time of the schedule. But yeah, man, I mean, I think it's I think that the team could do well. I have them going 12-5 based off of the schedule, and finishing off, the 2 seed in the NFC.
I mean, that would be solid. Obviously, you hope for the one seed, but that would be very, very solid. As for the schedule, for me, I look at a couple of different things. I immediately tried to look to see where are the toughest kind of areas, where are the easier areas, and something that points that comes out to me. 49ers get a 3-game home stretch very early against the Giants, Cardinals, and then obviously cap it off with a night game against the Cowboys. You get a very early home stretch, and then you also get week 2 at the Rams, which is essentially a home game for the 49ers. So you get like four home games in a row pretty much for the 49ers, which I think is huge. And if you talk about the New York Giants in game in week 3, I'm pretty sure the Giants are coming here on a Thursday. And so that makes it an obviously a early schedule for that. They come against the Cardinals, but or after facing the Cardinals on the road. But I think that weeks 2 to week 5 is a good stretch for opposing, or not for opposing, but for the quarterback, right? You get some familiarity, some level of consistency in where you're playing might help you elevate your play a little earlier at a time where the 49ers might need more wins. As for a tougher stretch, immediately pinpointing weeks 12 to 14, you go face Seattle on the road on a Thursday in Lumen Field for Thanksgiving. You come back on a longer week. You face the Eagles on the road again, and then you come back and face the Eagles at home. I think that's going to be a tough 3 game stretch for the 49ers, understanding the opponents, the divisional aspect of it, and also the way the schedule's placed.
And those are the two biggest rivals, I would say, for the 49ers right now, with the Rams not necessarily being as competitive. Obviously, we know the Seattle 49er rivalry is fierce. And then the Eagles are turning into a really big rival, obviously, with what happened last season and Debo coming out. That's going to be a really big game for both teams. And potentially, I think the winner of that ends up the number 1 seed in the NFC, as well, because I think by far the Eagles and the 49ers are the two best teams in the NFC. So that's going to be a very, very important stretch, because I think that stretch is going to let us know who wins the NFC West, also who wins the NFC overall, based off of that stretch, which a lot of pressure on those 3 games.
No, definitely, definitely. What's a game you're looking forward to?
Um, so there's 2 games that I'm looking for. I mean, I think there's a lot. I mentioned a lot of games, but the 2 games that I think I'm circling are the ones against Cincinnati and the ones against Baltimore.
Mm,
And the reason for that is I think those are 2 teams that could easily be in the Super Bowl. And I think they're also 2 games where we get to kind of see where this defense is going to be able, if they're, where are they going to be as elite as we want them to be? Obviously, with Cincinnati, you're playing one of the better quarterbacks in the league, probably top 5 quarterback in the league, with probably a top 5 offense, right? As far as the weapons receiver wise. So can this secondary under Steve Wilkes take that leap that we're expecting them to take under a guy that's known for his secondary prowess, right? Because the 2 biggest things that I think the 49ers have had an Achilles heel with is speed on the outside with the receivers, and then a mobile quarterback, right?
right.
So the speed on the outside with the receivers and stuff like that, you're obviously going to see it with Chase and Higgins and those boys over there. So I want to see how the defense steps up to that challenge, which could possibly be a Super Bowl, preview, right? Because both of those teams are definitely favorites to make it to the Super Bowl. The other game is Baltimore, right? I'd mentioned the speed on the outside with the receivers. The other one is mobile quarterback. Obviously, the best mobile quarterback in the league is Lamar Jackson, and that's who that's who the 49ers are going to play in Baltimore. So can that defense fix that option? Because to me, if they're able to show well against those 2 games, to me that's going to show me whether or not this team is ready to win a Super Bowl. Because I think if they could fix those 2 things, Rohan, or show that they've significantly gotten better at those 2 aspects of their
Mhm.
defense, to me, then they could beat the Eagles. They could beat, whomever they need to beat in the NFC, and they could compete against anybody in the AFC as well, to end up winning a Super Bowl. So those are the 2 games that I think are going to really show us what this team is made of.
I think that those are 2 really good games that you picked. I really am interested in the Cincinnati one, especially because it's at home. Baltimore obviously being on Christmas too, so 2 really good games that are on the schedule. One that I'll go for, one that is an intriguing game, just because the last time we saw this team, they were in a much different state. Jacksonville, Week 10 on the road. Trevor Lawrence obviously developing into a top 10 quarterback. He already is one, in my opinion, maybe even closer to that top five range. And I think that on the road, off the bye week, it's going to be an intriguing game. I think that this team is an up and coming team in the Jacksonville Jaguars. Last time we saw Lawrence, it was his rookie year where they were one of the worst teams in the NFL. Now, do I think the 49ers are going to lose this game? No. I think they should still be able to win this game just because that defense is obviously so imposing. But I'm intrigued to see how they face off against another talented quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, an up and coming one who's got the ability to do quite a bit of things.
Yeah, and I mean Trevor Lawrence has weapons that he didn't have last time, right? ETN is fully healthy and he came on really strong last half of the season last year. And the addition of Calvin Ridley, I think, is going to be phenomenal. He was really good in Atlanta. He's had a whole year off, obviously due to his suspension last season, and I think he wants to come out and with a bang as well. And if he's anything close to what he was when he was playing in the league 2 years ago, that's going to be a very great connection between him and Lawrence. I think over there in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm excited for that. Calvin Ridley was a favorite of mine before he left, obviously due to the suspension. Excited to see what he's got to do.
What's your prediction as far as I know you're not big in predictions and all that kind of stuff, but what do you based off of what you saw and how the schedule lined up, what do you think the 49ers finish record wise?
This is tough. I haven't actually gone through it, so I'm just going through it in my head right now. I would say probably yeah, around you. 12-5 probably, maybe closer to 11-6. I'd say 11-6. I think there are a lot of tougher games where it could go 50-50. You talk about the Bengals, you talk about the Cowboys, you talk about that three-game stretch that I pointed out. You talk about the Ravens, you talk about a couple of these other games where, it might be 50-50. But I mean, I think that it really depends on how strong do they start. If once that question's answered, I think we get a much clearer picture of the rest of the season. But I'd probably say around 11-6 right now.
That's interesting because I think 11-6 probably makes them a wild card team,
I don't think so. I,
right?
I, I think that this is going to be a more competitive division than last year. I think the Rams are going to be better than last year. They had a lot of injuries last year. I think they're going to be in that wild card race this year, winning around 9 to 10 games, which is why I think you have three teams potentially for the NFC West in that race. Seattle probably is around the same boat, winning about 10 games, and so I think that they'll be able to win the NFC West with the 11 games that they win.
Interesting. See, I'd be interesting to see that because I think it's going to take 13 or 14 wins to win the NFC,
Wow.
and I think you have to win 12 or 13 to win the NFC
Okay.
West.
Okay.
Because I do think that it's going to be more competitive, but I think there's like 7 to 10 teams that could possibly make the playoffs, but I think there's only 4 teams that could win the NFC. And I think those teams, and then there's a lot of teams that are probably going to be tanking for Caleb Williams type of thing
Mhm.
in the NFC as well. Um, so yeah, I think it's going to take. I think the team, whoever wins the NFC is probably going to be 13-4, 14-3, somewhere around there, and then 12, 13 wins is going to win the divisions.
No, I think that's, I mean, tough task. It could definitely happen, though. I could definitely see it happening. And, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if the 49ers win 12 wins, I think, yeah, they're close to that one seed range. Probably get the two seed if that's the case. But, hey, man, NFC is going to be interesting. It was wide open last year, apart from the top two teams. We'll see how it plays out this year for sure.
I love it, man. I'm excited to get back into it. Are you? I know you're back Bay Area now. Are you going to all the training camps and you going to be, doing all that kind of stuff like you did last
I
year?
anticipate I'll be there every day, so we'll figure it out as the
Nice.
schedule comes along in a few day or in a few weeks. But anticipating I'll be there, so coverage will definitely be there as normal.
I love it. You did a great job last year, so I'm excited to see your coverage this season as
Hey,
well.
it'll be a fun time for sure, and we'll definitely be going live that time. So make sure you guys check it out.
Love it.
But For those of you guys that are still here, make sure you subscribe to both channels, both my personal channel and Sunil's. We had a lot of fun today on the stream. Talk Trey Lance, talk Mike Martz, Sam Darnold, and the schedule to cap it off. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. It's been a blast talking with you, Sunil. Any last thoughts before we head on out?
Nah, man. Just stay tuned. Keep locked in the channel. Obviously, we're getting into the time of the season where it gets exciting. So, you know, pre-season starting, training camp, all that kind of good
Oh,
stuff.
yeah. I'm excited for the offseason. We talked about a couple of the topics that are going to be impacted in the offseason. We'll see how they go. But once again, guys, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll be back very soon with some more content.